Hello reason people, Bear here and welcome to my channel, and today we're going to be looking at patch randomization, and with this process we can randomize VSTs, rack extensions, stock devices, and utilities and effects. So let's have a look and see how this is done. So currently you can see the randomizer is actually now working. So as soon as I stop the process, see it stops on a patch, and we can start to play to see what it is, or we can choose another patch. It's actually controlled by this simple combinator here, and it obviously has an activate button. So when obviously I click on activate, it's going to be whizzing around, and then we just click on it again to deactivate it, and it's that simple. So I say when we click on activate, it goes, and then when we stop it, it stops. Now with randomization, you're not going to get a fantastic patch every single time, and you can get a lot of rubbish most of the time, to be perfectly honest. However, with the process I've put together, we can limit what we're randomizing. We can also limit the range of what we're randomizing as well. And by doing so, we get better hits when we are doing random programs. And of course, when you find a sound you really like, quite interesting, you just save it. It's as simple as that. You can just save it away. Let's actually have a quick look and see what is going on inside this randomizer. And it is very basic indeed. What we have quite a few little LFOs which are generating the randomization for me. It looks very pretty when it's running. And what we do is we take that LFO signal and we're pumping it out of the external MIDI instrument, and we're hitting a loopback, coming back in via a surface controller, and that is mapped to the instrument. So we are limited to the instruments that we can use. In fact, we're limited. I've done 2,777 maps. So that's what we're limited to at the moment, which, as you can see, is quite a large limit. There is some other limitations because of the way the CC works. CC goes from 00 to 119, or should I say that's what the EMI supports. Really, it should go from 00 up to 127, but the EMI only supports up to 119. So that means that we can only randomize 120 parameters per device. Now I have looked into it, and there is a way, and I expect going forward in the future I've come out with what I'm going to refer to as Bank 2, and that will give us another 120. So effectively we'll have 240 parameters we could randomize. But I think you can probably work out in your own head that even having something as basic as 120, you should get quite good randomization. And to be honest, there's so many extensions, rack extensions out there that are less than 120 parameters. When you start getting to VSTs and that, they seem to go OTT, and they seem to go the other way. Another feature I would just like to touch on is we're not limited to just randomizing one device at a time. As you can see here, I've got 4 separate devices and they're all being randomized at the same time. Obviously, these could actually be 4 separate instruments across 4 separate tracks. They don't have to be in the same combinator, they don't have to be linked in any single way. But obviously, this feature was designed more to do with an instrument and several effects units put together. So how does this actually fit together? Well, quite simply, we got ourselves 4 combinators, and with them 4 combinators, they're actually set up to look at 4 separate MIDI ports. So let's have a look at the installation now. And the installation really has 3 steps. Setting up the Midi Loopback software itself, obviously with the random ports, and then step 2 will be actually downloading and installing the codecs and the mapping files. There's not much to that, it's a simple download. And the third step will be setting up the service controller. There'll be 3 service controllers that we will be setting up. So I'll go through that in the next section. Let's have a look at setting up our loopback. I happen to use a MIDI loopback called loopMidi, as you can see. It's been around for donkey's years, it works really well. There's loads of other versions, or loads of other little apps for Windows, and there's a few I believe out there for the Mac. I also believe you've got one built in called the IAC, so I'm not a Mac user, so, and my understanding of that software is you have to set up your in and out ports, so remember to set up both of them ports. With loopMidi, under setup, quite straightforward. I've actually removed all my ports, so there's nothing in here. All I need to do is under new port name, put the first port in, which is called random, click on the plus, that's it added, be right at the bottom. And as I'm here, I'm actually going to add in my random port B, cheater here. And we need obviously our C and D ports. Get to the bottom, and there's all our 4 ports set up. And that's it. That's all we need to set up. Nothing else to do with the loopback. The next step is to download the codecs and the mapping file. So from the Dropbox location, which is obviously in the description, download all the files you can see locally. Once you have them downloaded, inside the zip file, we have a directory called remote. So what you need to do is just extract that, or just do a copy of that. And where that needs to go is inside your ProgramData and into the Propellerhead Software directory. So just paste it in there. You're going to get a little warning to confirm that you want to replace the folder. Just say yes. It's also going to ask you again, so I'm going to say do this for all current items. It's also going to do it for my mapping. And now, all right, I already have these files obviously there. So you wouldn't get that message. Just say replace the files and off you go. And that's it. So that's step 2 of having the codecs all installed. So the third step is going to be setting up our control surface. So obviously under preference control surface, click on add, bring that screen into focus. Here we go. Under manufacturer, we're going to select other. Under model, you will now have a new model under here called MIDI Random, and that's really what we've done by installing that codecs and our mapping file. We can give it a name. Now this name can be anything you want. I always tend to call it what I'm also going to give it the MIDI port name. So in this case, MIDI Random, and then here are our ports that we actually set up. I'm going to select random, click OK. And basically just repeat that action for your port D, C and B. And that will be all the ports set up. Now everything's installed correctly, the randomizer should start working. But there is a little gotcha on how you load the randomizer in. Yes, it's a combinator, and yes, you can just drag it in. But what you've got to be careful of is when you do drag it in, it does fire off MIDI data. I see this as a slight flaw within Reason itself, because ideally it should really load up the patch and then decide what it's going to do, but it seems to do it on the fly. And you can actually see that happen. But before I do, I'm just going to pull in an instrument. Oh, there we go. Pull in pulse. I'm going to lock my random MIDI port to it. So that's my surface controller. So I'm really unblocking that, but that's my random MIDI port. And then what I'm going to do now is I'm going to bring up my loopMidi software. And what we're going to be looking at here is the throughput on that random line. When I drag in my combinator, you're going to see that throughput change. And you'll actually see pulse change itself as well. So the configuration of pulse is totally changed from its default patch. We just turn it up. So that's what it's changed it to, and this is what we had it set to. So you may be asking, okay, so the best way of adding the randomizer, I just need to wait a second for it to delete. And the reason it takes a little while to delete and to add is obviously it's loading up, 120 EMIs in that combinator, and I can't remember exactly how many LFOs, about 40 plus LFOs up as well. So this time what we're going to do is I'm going to mute it, and by muting it, doesn't matter what Reason sends out on their MIDI ports, it's going to go to the loopback, and the loopback's just going to totally ignore it. And you saw then absolutely 0 bytes. Or should I say you didn't see anything happen, which is the correct way. Now, once I unmute this port, it's not going to suddenly kick into action or anything. Then bytes have gone, and now, obviously our pulse is still on. That same sound. As I say, we should be working now, so we should be able to just hit that activate button. And there we go, we've got some randomization happening. Now this is the default randomize patch rather than one of my special ones, so it is affecting absolutely everything what's going on. So just bear that in mind. So what we're going to look at next is how can we limit and decide what we wish to randomize, what we don't want to randomize, and how much do we want to randomize it by. So let's actually have a look at that next. I've picked on the saturation knob because there's only 3 parameters, and obviously when we're running our randomizer, we've only got 3 things to look at, so we're just going to keep it nice and simple. But to start with, I'm just going to go in a bit of 101 with the CV signal, it being converted into MIDI, and how it comes back actually into Reason. At the top of this device, you may have noticed we've got 2 other buttons. What I haven't spoken about yet really is test active and the test freeze. And it's just to do with this little section at the top. And this is actually nothing to do with the randomized process. It's a way of seeing how the signal really is working and flowing. So at the moment, if I just click on test activation, this is the LFO, and this is the signal, what we're using as our randomization process. What we can do is obviously we can actually send that out, and I'm going to send that out on CC4. I know it's actually spare in this particular case. So I'm now sending that on CC4, and what I'm going to do is this knob here is connected up to this other CV analyzer. And what we're going to do is we're going to actually assign that 204. So now what's going out, we're getting coming back in again. So we can actually see the signal. This little button here will just freeze that. Now these patterns are not going to be 100% identical. And they're not going to be 100% identical because it's going to come down to how the MIDI's doing its timing. It's going to be slightly out of how the CV's going. It doesn't matter really because we're doing a randomization. But what this will help us with, and these are the figures we're interested in. This top one will always go between 0 and 127. In fact, if we actually go and look at the raw data, you can see it's actually going between 1 and 0, but it's down to 5 decimal places. So, we've got a combination then of 900, or should I say 99,999. So that's the what that can actually choose. And we're actually scaling that down between 0 and 127. You may have noticed a smooth option as well. And that's basically, there's a noise with a smooth, and that's what a noise with a smooth looks like. And okay, yeah, we're really in the digital world, but think of this as an analog signal, and this is how it's being digitized back in. And again, we can freeze that, and you can start seeing how this analog signal's got all the nice little slopes, and then obviously the digital one, because of the way it's doing its timing, it really does sort of flatten that signal out. And when you start looking at this sort of stuff, this is when you start thinking about if you're using 24-bit or 16-bit sound, this is the sort of compression that can be actually going onto your signal. Now, what we can do is we can limit the range by increasing the knob on the front of the EMI. And think of this as your base. So, okay, at the moment it's 0, and I can actually increase this, say, to 20. What that means is if I hit the reset on here, when I run the randomizer, this will never go below 20. I'm just going to put that back onto a square one. So it's never going to go below 20, and I call it my base value. So now I can just bring that back down. We flip to the back of the rack, and we use the trim here. If I bring that down to 20 as well, say now, what that means is, and I'm going to just do a reset, we should never go above 20. I think because of the algorithm going on here, it's probably not going to go above 19. So this is a way we can limit, but think of this as a base, because we've got the trim set to 20. If I now increase this to 20, it doesn't mean we're in a range of between 20 and 20. It's actually mean we're going to be in a range between 20 and 40. So you've got to think of this as the base value, and you add it onto the trim. So as I increase this up, you start to see that number increasing as it randomizes. So if I stop this now at 20 and hit reset again, we're now going to get between 20, in this case again, 39. And that's how we can start to limit how much we're going to randomize. So as I say, the on-off will be a simple case of just killing the signal dead, so we're not going to send anything to that parameter whatsoever. Or we can actually limit how much we want to randomize. But as I say, remember, this is going to be a base, and then we're going to add whatever value we trim it down to at the back. So let's actually look at that as, say, a bit more practical of our actual saturation knob itself. So if we increase this up, say something like to 52, flick around the back of the rack, bring this down, and you have to bring this down quite a bit. Say I'm going to say 52, so let's say 12, 24 would be the range I'd want to go for. That should be even. Let me just hide them. Turn this on. Yeah. Now you might be thinking, oh, how was I working out them figures there? Is, well, halfway point 64. I think it's maybe 63 point something, but 64 is the way to think of it as the halfway point. And because I stuck it on, what is it, 52, so it's 12 that way and 12 the other way. So this should actually automate evenly. We've still got the bypass going, so let's turn that off. It's a simple case of just switching that one off. Obviously, you set that up to where you want it to be. And there we go. And that's how we can actually restrict. It doesn't matter if you've got, say 120. Well, how do you know what CC is doing what? Because you don't really want to go through and test every one. And in some devices, it may not be blatantly obvious because they use panels, so you won't see all the controls actually being automated. Well, luckily there is a way we can do it, and what you just simply need to do is go into where you've got your remote map, which is obviously under ProgramData, Propellerhead Software, Remote, Maps, Other, and then you open up the Random Map. Now don't open it in Notepad. You could get away with opening it in Notepad, but whatever you do, don't make any changes and save it. If you do, you start screwing up the formatting and you're going to find, well, it's just not going to work. So make sure you use a proper editor. I happen to use Notepad++. Again, I'll put a link up for where you can download this from. It is a freebie and you can just donate to it. I think it's a really, really powerful editor. I like it because it's the way it opens up. And you can actually close it down, and the next time you open it up, it'll remember all your tabs, and that's one of the reasons I really love it. So you can see here we've got the saturation knob, and this is really the mapping for it. It's so simple: 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 2. And as I say, that just totally relates to these. And it's so on and so forth. So we was doing a number of things with Pulse. So let's have a quick find of Pulse in here. Not that one, that's the one I'm after. And if you remember rightly, on my one, I did turn off the volume was one of them. So there we go, volume was 45. And we also turned off things like, I think it was the semi and the fine. And so obviously you can see them there. And if I actually go and load up, let's just turn this off a second, so we don't want to activate it. So let's go and actually load up Randomizer for the Pulse. Here it goes. And if we scroll right down very quickly, as I said, 45 and C's turned off. And the other numbers we were looking at were 63. You just literally scroll down. You can see I've turned off 63 and 64, and maybe a couple of others turned off. And that's how I've done it with Pulse, so they weren't randomized. And as I say, if I wanted to, we can shorten it. Now, this is the bit where you guys can actually come in handy and feedback these combinators, and obviously I can make them available to the rest of the community. Obviously, if you've got a Dropbox account, then we can set up a Dropbox share to share these files around. So it will be a case that you're going to suddenly come along and go, oh, I use this device so much. This is how I think it's set up best for the randomizer to give you some real good sounds most of the time. And I think it doesn't even matter if you start thinking about even cutting down the filters a bit, and you know what we want is to have a good hit rate. Right, hopefully I have covered everything to do with this little device at the moment. Obviously, if you've got any questions, please do feel free to comment, and happy randomizing.